Hello, Chokma, Chokma. My name is Amanda Wixon. I'm the Associate Curator of Native History and Culture here at the Autry. And it is my honor to present the first speaker of my panel on Plains pictographic drawing. So I will be introducing John Pepion. John Pepion is a graphic artist from the Piikani Band of Blackfoot Confederacy and lives on the Blackfeet Reservation in Montana. His first artistic influence was his grandfather, Daniel Webb Pepion Sr., an oil painter and woodcarver who encouraged John to draw from an early age. Pepion's work focuses on his Blackfeet culture, combining traditional forms with contemporary sensibilities to create works that reference Blackfeet ideals while remaining relevant in today's world. And he's also a curatorial consultant in the exhibition this evening.
Can you hear me? Mic check, all right. So, like you said, my name is John Pepion, and I'm from Montana, and also proud to represent the Blackfeet Nation, but more importantly, proud to be here to represent my community in this discussion and the exhibition tonight. So, the kind of art I do, I label it Plains Indian graphic art, and Joe Horsecapture also helped me come up with that term because what I do stems from the rock art to the ledger art to the winter counts and all the plains art to what I'm doing now. So the style I do is pictographic, and right here is a piece of some of the stuff I do like on a napkin. But the whole, like John earlier was talking about, the whole, what I do stems from rock art. In my community, in my tribe, we're heavily known for pictographs and petroglyphs, especially with the red ochre paint. And these are two pictures within our territory. The one on the left is from Writing on a Stone in Alberta, a very famous place where we have both petroglyphs and pictographs. And then the one on the right is from Bear Gulch, which is by Missoula and Butte. And we have a very distinct style that is very unique to us and my tribe and my people that I carry on. And that's why I start out this presentation, so you have an understanding of my community and where I come from, and you'll recognize my style. So with that, from the pictographs and the petroglyphs, we also had winter counts, which warriors painted very important times in our community, like smallpox, maybe when the missionaries came, maybe when the last buffalo hunt happened. And we also had war records, and were done on teepee liners, alkides, teepees, even horses, even on parflesh saddles. As Blackfoot people, we have a lot of pictographs on everything, even our moccasins we wear. Right here, this is an ancestor of mine known as Big Brave, and this is one of his teepee liners that he painted, and the teepee liner is made of old flour sacks from the government when we were forced on reservations. So the adaptation to use what we had at the time to continue what we're doing, it's done with earth pigment, and within my artwork I have red horses, blue horses, and green horses. People always ask me, where do I get those colors? And so I get them straight here from my ancestor right here, who has several winter counts, also in the National Museum of the American Indian. There's also winter counts of his there. So a couple examples of winter counts and war records. So the one on the left is at Yale University. So I went out there a couple years ago to visit their collection and visit this specific, more personal stories of hunting done on a wolf, a species of wolf that no longer exists in Montana no more. And then the hide in the middle is from the hide in the middle and the one on the right are also from the Glenbow Museum in Calgary, Alberta. So here's some examples of Blackfoot winter counts and war records. And like a lot of Plains tribes, a favorable color is red ochre. So like I said, we also painted our horses. We still paint our horses. So you can't hardly see, but it's a white horse with red pictographs on the horse. And it's from Walter McClintock from the glass slides at the Yale collection. And the collection that you'll be seeing tonight at the exhibition is what was also collected by Walter McClintock. Some of you might know some of his works from a book he wrote called Old North Trail. And he lived amongst my people for years, so it's a very honor to work with that collection as well. And here's an example of a woman's saddle with pictographs on it at the, I'm trying to think of the museum. It's a museum in Lethbridge, the Galt Museum, that's where that's from. Also, as an artist, I get invited to visit collections, and I focus on pictographic art mostly, and artifacts from my community. So this is me, maybe about 3 years ago here at the Autry on the left, looking at part of a teepee liner that's part of the exhibit that you'll see tonight. And then most recently, on the right at the Denver Art Museum, looking at a war record from a Guyanese blood ending from Canada. So also being from the Blackfoot Confederacy, people always ask me, well, aren't you Blackfeet? What does Blackfoot mean? Is it singular? Is it plural? But there's 3 bands in the Blackfoot Confederacy, and I belong to the Blackfeet Nation. Not every, so basically I tell people, every Blackfeet is Blackfoot, not every Blackfoot is Blackfeet. Yes. So more examples of pictographics. Our style is very distinct. So it gets into ledger art. I also am most known for ledger art as a ledger artist, but the style I do is pictograph, and I do it on anything. So the one on the left is a ledger from my community from 1905, collected by Walter McClintock. That's also in the exhibition tonight. And then the one on the right is, the bottom is from Houghton Running Rabbit. I think it was 1895. I've never seen it before in my life. And my older work is on top, and I did a comparison, and it's crazy to see that they're very identical without even knowing of this piece or knowing of his work. So here's an example of my style of ledger art. I do antique maps, basically antique documents from Montana, mainly in my areas and community. If you look on the left, it's what you consider a war lodge. A lot of the pictographs are on there, war records are in the middle. Also, the one on the right is also a war horse, and so as I lead you into this presentation, it's also letting you know that it's 2025 and this never stopped. This is still continuing on. It never disappeared. This is still going on. We still have knowledge keepers, and so I'm learning all the time. So the one on the right is a buffalo hide I painted. It's not really a winter count or a war record. It was more of a tribute to buffalo. As Plains people, buffalo is the staff of life. And then as I start painting more buffalo hides and elk hides, the one on the right was from last year. I was commissioned by our community college for their 50th anniversary. And it's their personal story. So it's a winter count, a modern winter count in my community that I was fortunate enough to be asked to do and learn with knowledge keepers. And so it's telling the 50 years of our community college. And what's special about it, it's the first winter count in my community in over 100 years. Also within our community and the art I do, I also have the rights and transfer of knowledge to paint teepees. So the one on the left is a teepee in the collection that was Walter McClintock's personal teepee that you'll also see tonight in the exhibition that's actually put up. So when I viewed it with Joe in the collection and the other curators, it was rolled up. And here we are looking at it, identifying some of the pictographs. And then me and Joe told the conservation that we're going to put it up, and you should have seen the reaction. So now it's up. I don't think it's been up for over 100 years. Yeah. And here on the right is me painting a more recent teepee from last year. So I also like paint teepees as well with elk hides, buffalo hides, ledger paper. Also buffalo skulls. Also skateboards. So I'm also using that pictographic style that is unique to my community and developed my own style and mixing it both. So you could see on top of the skateboard is a piece of ledger art that I'm doing more specifically in the pictographic style for my community. So my art is all about identity. When a Blackfoot person sees my art, they know where I'm from. I'm telling a story. It means something. Indigenous art has a collective spirit. Everything means something. Here's a basketball team in our community that asked me to paint their bus while they were going on a basketball tournament to go count coup. So I said yes. So I'm telling their story as they're going on this trip to go count coup. So I painted pictographs on their war horse as they're going into war, which is basketball. So it gets back into where I'm at now and what I do and I'm known for. So one of the most recent pieces of my unique style of ledger art. So me as a Plains Indian graphic artist, I'm known for the long legs and the large hoofs. And people ask me where I got that from. I got that from the animals on our teepees. Everything within my art is inspired from my community and our people. And thank you.
Thank you, John. Also, when he said, now it's up, the teepee, that was after like months of planning and practicing, and teams were made and buttons were made for the teams. And in a matter of months, something that I saw Brocade's family do in just a couple of minutes at Crow Fair was a much bigger deal for us. So it is my honor to introduce the next speaker, Avis Charley. Avis Charley is known for her drawings and figurative oil paintings, which often depict Native empowerment and Indigenous identity. She earned her degree at the Institute of American Indian Arts, and her work is featured in numerous museums across the country. She is Spirit Lake, Dakota, and Dine. Welcome, Avis.
Han Madakyapi. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I guess it's afternoon now. My name is Avis Charley, and I'm Spirit Lake, Dakota, and Dine. My family comes from Spirit Lake Nation in North Dakota and the Four Corners in New Mexico, Bistai. And so today I want to share how I carry ledger art forward. I'm sorry, I just graduated from an MFA program, and it was a rigorous 2 years, and I've been taking myself so seriously, and I know what I'm talking about, but it's just, I gotta loosen up. So, okay. So excuse me if I start, I just wanna stay organized and speak with clarity. When I was first introduced to ledger art, I remember having a visceral reaction to the scenes, the fighting scenes, the hunting scenes, and the masculine energy. And I remember thinking, as I was studying, this male-dominated art form, and I was thinking about that saying about behind every great man, there's a greater woman. And I was, and it was instinctual for me to want to balance out the energies and imagery. And so I started sharing stories about community and motherhood and families. And so on the right, I created this imagery called protectors. And I was thinking about my friends who are creating positive changes in our communities. And so I wanted to depict and tell their stories. And I remember when I first started ledger art, I used to use all the colors in the crayon box. And over the years, I realized that if I bring it down to 4 or 5 colors, it just has a more refined look to it. And also ledger art was my entry point into storytelling. It showed me how stories exist, there's stories inside of me that I could share, but also how to have, I guess, working with colors, balancing out the colors. And so I was first introduced to ledger art by Terrence Gardapi. It was about 2010, and he was in town here in LA for the Autry art market. And I was living in the Valley at the time, and he stayed with us for the weekend. And I hosted him and his wife, and I remember just tagging along with them as they set up at the Autry and driving them around. And he was, schooling me about ledger art, the history of ledger art, how he got started, the materials he uses, his techniques. And so at the end of the weekend, he gave me a stack of ledger paper, and he said, "Your people do ledger art as well, Avis, so you should give it a try." And so that's how I got started. So I'll always be thankful for Terrence and his wife, Catherine. For context, I like to give a little description about myself. Like I said, I'm half Dakota and half Dine. I was born here in LA at General Hospital, the USC County Hospital, and I was raised in Long Beach, California. My mom had relocated out here in the late 60s from North Dakota, and then my dad and all his brothers moved out here as well. And I remember the story my mom used to tell me. She was on one of these buses, the RTD buses. I believe they stand for Rapid Transit Department or something, but we used to call it the Rough, Tough, and Dangerous back in the day. And I believe they're replaced by the Blue Line or something. But also, as graffiti was my first art community, and I remember spray painting on these walls, on these buses, back when I was like 13 years old. A couple of them used to come into Long Beach, because Long Beach, we had our own bus system. And so this is a seriograph. And I remember I've always wanted to do an image of a bus. And so, I was pleased with it. I was satisfied with it. And I was thinking, this is my creation story right here. And so for further context, there's a word in Dakota, shkan, and this word really informs a lot of my work, and it means to move about, to stir. And, thinking about, my grandparents, they had relocated to the Los Angeles area in 1954. They voluntarily relocated out here. And my grandma had a few kids at that point, and it didn't work out for her, so she ended up saving her money to move back, and she got as far as Salt Lake City, and then the Mormon church helped her get back to Fort Totten in North Dakota. And then my grandpa eventually returned, and they had more kids. But my uncle, Oliver Gord Sr., he returned back in 1968 to go to Cal State LA. And then one by one, my aunts and uncles trickled down and came down here. And there was a point I wanted to make about this. So this slide shows why movement is central to my work. I'm really interested in indigenous life in motion. And so with ledger art, I remember when I first started, I used it as a tool to aid in my healing, because I had lost my mom tragically, 26 years ago. And so when I first created ledger art, I remember wanting to do adult daughter and mother images. And so I did that. So this one right here is called Remember Me This Way. And this is a letterhead from Los Angeles from the 1920s. Because here in LA, they had paper fairs, and I remember digging through their papers and postcards and coming across all these old letterheads, and I felt like that shares my mom's story. And so with ledger art, I realized it helped me process and accept her being gone. And when I first started working on ledger art, to this day still, I like to put smoked hide in the room with me, and that, just to activate those senses and the smell. And in our ways, they're always with us. And so I could feel my mom's presence with me and our ancestors. And I have a 17-year-old daughter, and so it's also fun to document her growth through ledger art. And so here are some more images, and I do enjoy creating mother and daughter images, as you can see. And so as I processed my grief and started healing, I started thinking about the women around me, the ones who motivate me, the women I admire, the ones who are, like I said, are creating positive changes for their communities. I started thinking about them and their stories. And honestly, this was a response to non-native Western painters that I would see in Scottsdale and Santa Fe. And I would think about how they objectify us and use us as central subjects with fictional names, fictional histories. And I was thinking I could do that better. Like, I know actual women with some badass stories. And so I started asking my friends, and and so I started sharing their stories. Like on the left is one of my favorite jingle dress dancers, Mallory Oakes. She has a unique style of dancing. And so I was able to create this portrait of her. And on the right is a friend of mine, Dr. Cristina Castro, who's Jemez Pueblo and Taos Pueblo and Chicana, but she grew up here in LA too. And she's an activist. Like she walks the walk. Is that the saying? She walks the walk. And so, I just watching her disrupt and take up space and vocalize. It's just inspiring, and these strong women around me really encourage me to just be better. Like, I even painted a portrait of Jessa Ray, because I remember at Gathering of Nations years ago when my daughter was 3, she was dancing, and I saw Jessa Ray when she was Miss Indian World. And my daughter and I walked up to her, and I wanted to take a picture with her. My daughter take a picture with her, and Jessa Ray was so gracious and just elegant, and just the energy. And so that stayed with me. And so I had this idea about telling a story about North meets South. My mom being North, my dad being from the South, and then meeting up, but also Jessa Ray and her husband, they're also North meets South. And so it was a fun project to work on with her. And so going back to, how past work informs my work today, historically speaking, I remember when I first started ledger art and I started researching and digging through collections and looking at black and white historical photos, but also I found what I enjoyed was going on auction sites, like Cohen's auction sites, and because they would give a little bit more of a description of the materials, and they would guess circa what years. And I remember seeing these Dakota florals, and being so used to seeing, Lakota geometric works with the white background and the primary colors, which absolutely I love. But I remember responding to this, thinking of admiring the expanded palette and the colors and the fluidity in the work. And then, so in the center picture is myself. Like I said, I grew up in Long Beach, and my first art community was, being a tagger and graffiti artist. And at 13, 14, 15, we were all organized. A lot of us came from single family homes, but yet we would meet up at the beach, meet up at the park, and have meetings about, our tagging crews. And we would talk about supplies, the type of markers we would use, from mean streaks to pilots to sakuras and spray paints. And my name was Poet. It stood for putting out every toy. I didn't like poetry, so the Poet was my nickname. And I remember thinking about, what would it look like if I took, our beadwork designs and added graffiti elements to it. And so I did that with the far right. And when I completed that piece, I remember just feeling like that fits me, who I am. And also, it introduced me to materials. So I took sand from Long Beach, sand from New Mexico, and I combined it on canvases with matte medium and oil sticks and built up these layers. And I had fun with color and balancing out the color. And so that's how I feel like, materials also tell their story. And so going back to school, I went back to school for my MFA as an older student because I had all these ideas. I feel like, it started with ledger art, and how, like I said, that was an entry point to storytelling. And so I was curious about objects and videos and sound. And so my whole objective was to come off the wall. I wanted to come off the wall and tell a story. And then, with ledger art and paintings too, it's like I'm in control. I'm the author. Everything's well thought out. It takes me months to come up with an idea for a painting. I think about who would be best to fit this painting and what she's gonna wear, her body language, the lighting. But with the objects, it's like I had to surrender, and it was humbling. Like I had to just sit in my studio with these objects and let them tell their story. And so I was thinking about, like growing up here in LA and my parents' first apartment, what it was like when they first moved here, in the late 60s, early 70s, the hopes and dreams that they brought, and what that might have felt like. And then also my own memory of lived experience of growing up with my aunts from my Dakota side, my crazy aunts, and then my uncles on my Navajo side, and just being around them and thinking as how they're visiting as pedagogy. And so this ironing board, so each material has a meaning, like with the extension cords, for example, I remember growing up, we always grew up in apartments here in LA or Long Beach, and thinking about extension cords and how they evoke these feelings of anxiety, and looking at them now as a burden, but also a bridge, because we're allowed to have electricity. And so, thinking about the anxiety that they bring, during my exhibition, I wanted to recreate that and spread it around my installation. That way, the visitors and the audience would feel that same anxiety that we feel as Indigenous women, who chose to relocate to cities and leave their homelands, thinking about back to my mom and my aunt stories. And so going back to this one, the centerpiece is an ironing board. I had come across it at a thrift store, and it had this old dingy cover on it. And I remember I was going to toss the cover and then use the ironing board for my installation. And my friend had pointed out how it had poppy designs. And I was like, I didn't even notice the poppy designs. And I was thinking about the natives that are from here. We're on their territory, the Tongva people, the Chumash people. And, the poppies, how they bloom annually out here. And so I decided to approach it with as tactile storytelling and using beads, as just to acknowledge them. So it's like a land acknowledgement piece without being cheesy. And so I wanted this to be a centerpiece and just to acknowledge that. And so with this, it's a stroller. And once again, I took sand from Long Beach, sand from New Mexico, and applied it for texture. And on the white stroller in the corner, it has some of my mom's Johnny Rivers lyrics to it that she used to listen to. And on the left is Buddy Red Bull's lyrics talking about, don't cry for me, I'll be back one day, you'll see. And so realizing this is another way to tell stories, going back to leisure art and narratives, this was humbling, like I said, for me to do, and it was a great experience. And so when I first started ledger art, it was about me almost desperately wanting to share our humanity as Native people to others. And so right now I'm at the point where I want to see the humanity in others. And I believe, storytellers make the world go round. And so this is one of my recent paintings from this year. This is Leah Hell. She's a filmmaker who grew up here in LA but resides in the Minneapolis area. And yes, thank you.
Yes, okay. Thank you both of you. Let's hear it again for our two speakers, John and Avis. So I have lots of questions, but first of all, you both talked about ledger art, and saying it goes back to ledger art, but just maybe for our people online and our live stream listeners and our audience, what does ledger art go back to? Where did it start? And I know Fort Marion and its influences, but can you talk a little bit about that? Go for it.
Well, to be more specific with Fort Marion and ledger art, I feel that it has a start with forced assimilation, removal, and putting us on reservations. So at the time, William Pratt had this idea that to ship some warriors and a few women off to an old Spanish fort in Florida called Fort Marion and held them prisoner for 3 years. And while they were imprisoned, he thought that by imprisoning them, they can't hunt buffalo no more, they can't battle no more, they can't live the life that they were used to. But while over there, the soldiers gave them blank or used ledger paper, crayons, colored pencils, or whatever they had. And the warriors took these objects and items given to them and start doing ledger art, pictographic art. And it was crazy about it. It's like a form of resistance. Even though they were there locked up for the life they were forced to not live, they were still living it on ledger paper. They were still battling on ledger paper. They were still dreaming on ledger paper. They were still living that life. So even today, ledger art is a form of resistance. And people always tell me personally, well, we gave you that ledger paper. Yeah, but people gave us that ledger paper, but it's my story, and that's what you can't take away. Thank you.
So, art that's created while incarcerated, and you're saying that, they're still living their lives and able to dream through the paper. And I'm sure in many ways that healed them, being incarcerated, but able to connect with their stories and their communities, even just on paper. This is for both of you actually, how does creating ledger art now heal you?
I talked a little bit about that in my presentation and how initially I approached it with using it as a tool to help process mourning my mom and feeling close to her. And so I'll always create ledger art because when you lose your mother, you never get over it. And so art has, saved me in so many ways. I used to say graffiti saved my life, but now I say, art saved my life.
I agree. I don't think I would be here today if it wasn't for art. Art is healing. Art has been able to heal me. I also go into communities and use art as a tool of healing to reach youth. I also work with all ages, and my art is also about healing and a healing journey, healing from the grief, everything we grew up with, even to the health.
So I know when you're both saying you go out, out into the communities and you travel far and wide, certainly. And I know you've been, bumming around the globe lately, John.
France.
So can you talk a little bit about how your art is received, even just in Europe, as a contemporary ledger artist, where we often find in Europe, they want to keep us in the past. They want us historical. How is it received, and what kind of discussions are you having there about your art now?
Well, basically, I'm brought in to tell my story, and it's also part of being here, and part of the exhibition is a lot of people have this idea, especially with Plains Indian, that we no longer exist, especially in other countries, and they all think that all indigenous people live in teepees. And so I get the most craziest questions all the time. And so I'm brought in and just tell the story from my perspective, who we are in 2025, because for years and years we were never allowed to tell our own story. So it's been great, it's been received well, and it's been a blessing to tell the world of who we are.
And so you notice there's a trend then in other museums, outside international museums, starting to incorporate Native art more into their repertoire of American art. Certainly I find that in academics as well. And so and for you, I know you just recently came off you're still in your Mellon fellowship. How did your study of pictographs sort of, what came first? Did you study sort of Western style art? And I know you did graffiti, but did you study Western style art and then pictographs, or was it pictographs and then Western style art? And then how did that change each other?
I tend to do everything backwards, seems like. And so I started with pictographs. Yeah, okay. And then went and studied, Western style.
Okay. And then how did that lead to your Mellon Fellowship?
Well, the Mellon Foundation Fellowship is a research residency, and when I came out of the MFA program, there was an opportunity to apply for one at the Institute of American Indian Arts. And in the MFA program, I was interested in narratives. I was actually interested in propaganda and visual messaging. And with IIA being a federally funded institution, I was curious of how the narratives of Indian art, how they evolved, and how our communities responded and reacted, resisted, complied. And so this goes back to actually the beaded ration pouch bags. I remember I had created a painting over the summer with a girl wearing one, and I was thinking about how that beaded ration pouch represents systems. I was thinking about how, like, myself, growing up here, you know, in Long Beach, and my mom, you know, us growing up being on welfare, and my mom couldn't get out of that system. You know, this was the 80s, and so it was hard for her to break free from that. And then I was thinking about how she got here, how through the relocation program, how there was promises to help, but you know, there wasn't, and how a lot of them, you know, ended up in poverty, or a lot of them didn't make it back home. And so I was thinking about how these systems labeled as care are actually systems of control. And so going back to, you know, narratives in Native art, and then, you know, what does it look like if I, you know, look through the students' work, look through the ephemera, look through the printed matter from IIA, and then, so that's what I'm doing right now, and it's scary because it's like a new medium, and it's like learning like a new language, and it's intimidating, but it's like a form of escapism as well, because I get lost in the archives from the 50s, 60s, and 70s.
So you're going to continue doing that, looking through the archive? I mean, it's never ending.
Yeah, it's never ending. And so that's where I'm at right now. And so it's a 3-month fellowship, and it ends December 15th. And so I'm nearing the end of that as well.
And so you mentioned something yesterday, John, about going back to ledger art in general. You mentioned how small it is, you know, how you visited some that are actually this big. And everybody thinks that ledger art is this big because we see it in books, but it's actually quite small. How does that affected your scale? And I noticed, you know, even with your installations, your scales are getting bigger and bigger. And so can you speak a little bit about that?
Also, I never said it in my presentation, but I'm also a muralist, and I do murals. I do huge pictograph murals as well. And I'm starting to do larger works, larger artworks. I started out probably just like the original ledger artists, doing little tiny corners and little tiny pieces, and never filled the space of the paper. But viewing the original ledgers has been very inspirational, because they're not like me. They didn't have a chance to sit there and sketch and perfect, and they did it right on a paper with no mistakes, and it looks perfect.
With scale, I've seemed to have been going bigger and bigger with my ledger arts and my paintings as well. I would like to go bigger. I feel like going bigger is easier. And so with the most recent ledger pieces I did, I think they were probably like 4 feet by 2 feet. Yeah, they were pretty big. And so I guess it's just, you know, instinctually, subconsciously, consciously as well, taking up space as a Native woman artist.
Mm-hmm. And I know, you know, both of you are successful commercial artists, and how important is it, you know, for young artists to learn how to navigate the art market? You know, you said something clever yesterday, that Fort Marion was the first marketplace, right?
The first Indian market?
First Indian market, because they were creating the drawings for sale. So I know I've heard from other, you know, Native artists in the past that they wish that they had learned more about navigating the art market, but were you challenged by that too, just entering the market as it was?
Yeah, like I said, I learned from Terrence Gardapi here at the Autry, and shortly after, they had encouraged me to apply for the Heard Art Market in Phoenix at the Heard Museum, and I applied not knowing what I was getting myself into, and I got in, and you know, I had a successful show, and that's how it started with myself. But you know, at the same time, it actually stunted my creative growth, because when you do art markets, it's like there's like 4, you know, big ones a year that I would do, and then small ones in between, and then you get known for a certain style, and then suddenly you're trying to keep up with these deadlines and these art markets, and you get in production mode, and it's almost like you lose yourself because you're just recreating the same thing over and over. And so that's what happened with me, and that's why I went back to school at a later age, because I feel like, there's other ways. And then I was learning from my other artist friends who were getting grants and residencies and funding to create what they want. And like I said, I have all these ideas that I want to expand on. And so, there's the pros and cons of Indian art markets. And it's not the only way. That's what I want these younger generations to know, and that's what I tell them. There's no one right way. And art markets aren't the only way as well.
I think it's a crazy question because I wish I was successful.
Sean.
And also, I've never did an art market. I'm not an art market
I
artist.
haven't.
And I think for me to tell the youth and other artists, just keep doing what you're doing. There's no rules, and it's okay to bend them.
Yeah, for sure. I noticed, you've had a lot of solo exhibitions, and whenever I see, as a Native person, when I see so-and-so's having a solo exhibition, I think, are they? Because it's their community, and it's their ancestors, and it's, centuries and centuries, if not thousands of years of tradition. You're never alone, in Native art. And so even as you each develop your own personal styles, you keep that long thread, and hopefully, our future Native artists also keep that thread. I think they will. I think they're in very good hands. Do you have any questions from the audience? Oh, she has the microphone. Joe has a question.
It's going to be for you, watch.
Actually, Avis is for you. So first of all, I'm a big fan of your drawing.
Thank you, Joe. And Joe has been a supporter since day one. So thank you, Joe.
You're welcome. So as mentioned in previous presentations, John talked about it. Jeremy mentioned it on his silver piece that showed those defeated enemies along the bottom, if you recall that. John mentioned it as well. Is historically, drawing pictographic work back in the day was 95% dominated by men. It's, it's kind of like today, it's like, oh yeah, I caught a fish this big. Instead, back in the day, it's men defeating their enemy. But you flip that narrative, right? So you have flipped it not only to provide your narrative, but also to ensure the accuracy of the women / girls that you depict. So considering that, do you sort of process that in a way like you're entering historically an area that men did, or do you approach it like, well, heck with them all, I'm owning this?
It's like I don't have a choice, like Jessa was saying, and I'm just a vessel, and I end up where I need to be. Just like with leisure art, I went into it not blindly, but not understanding that I'm a woman going into a male-dominated art space. Same thing with graffiti. There was only a few girl artists, and so I remember when, my tagging crew, my crew, they used to always tell me, you could write for a girl. It's like a backhanded compliment. And so I remember having to battle these boys like on streets and freeways. And I didn't realize what I was doing. I was just doing it. It was all, and same thing with ledger art, same thing with figure painting. If you think about it, it's another, I would say, male-dominated art form, especially in Santa Fe in a Native art world. And here I am coming in, painting women and, amongst these male painters, Native art painters. And so it's all just instinct. It's all instinct, and it's all just a force. It's just me chasing. The first time I spray painted on a wall, I remember just feeling like this force, an exchange of energy. And so that's the same high that I'm chasing.
Any other questions?
I just wanted to add to that really quick that it's like a big manly warrior art and warriors and me sitting up here looking stoic. But I'll tell you what, as indigenous people, we are nothing without are women. Women run the show. I thought I better say that before I get in trouble.
Good save, John. Good save.